Järgmisena on mul väga hea meel tuua sisse keskustelu in English. See on ette hoiatatud, sünkroontõlget ei toimu, mina ei üritagi seda siin kohapeal teha. Ja kogu seda arutelu, kus osalevad siis kutsutud oma asukohariigis viibivad eksperdid, nagu teie, riikide andmehaldajad, avaandmete eestvedajad, Tšehhist, Norrast ja Prantsusmaalt. Ja siis ka teistsugust vaadet pakuvad Capgemini Inventi inimesed, kes tegelevad avaandmete mõju kohta andmete kogumise ja selle teile esitlemisega. Ehk siis European Data Portali, Euroopa avaandmete portaali esindajad. Ja seda ingliskeelset vestlust juhib Liisa Past, kes on siis praegu värskelt küberneetika äriarendusjuht ja ammu teada küberkaitseekspert.
Ja katsun mitte viia läbi teraapia-sessiooni sellest, mis mina arvasin, kui mina riigist ära tulin. Või vähemalt mitte seda
oleks
arutelu käigus. Nagu Hille ütles, suur aitäh sulle, on arutelu inglise keeles. Küsimused tulevad endiselt Menti rakenduse kaudu. Miks mulle tuleb kõla monitori? Äkki saab sellega midagi teha, aitäh? Ja need küsimused seega võivad tulla nii eesti kui inglise keeles. With that, I'm glad to switch to English and just as a quick check to make sure that we see and hear you and you see and hear us. Czech Republic, are you there? Michal?
No sound.
No sound.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hey there.
Hello.
Secondly, Norway. I can see you. Can you see and hear us?
I can see and hear you all.
France, and this really truly feels like Eurovision.
Yes.
Yes, I can.
And finally, Capgemini taking a pan-European view. And I'll make sure to introduce you as we're going along. This panel brings together a truly diverse pan-European view of what the state of play and hopefully state of aspiration is across Europe when it comes to both open and shared data. And hopefully we'll hear a few war stories. In other words, lessons learned of mistakes that have been made so that we won't have to make them. So the question posed is, what is the value of open data? And how do you go about sharing data in a way that makes an impact? In other words, who the hell is Alice? How do we measure, how do we know impact is there? In a world where amount of data is incredibly growing with every week, month and year, and frankly where every single industry is really quite bad at quantification, let alone a meaningful measuring of impact. So with that, and with that slight ambition in mind, I'll first turn to Heather, who's a senior advisor in the Resource Data Center for Data Sharing in the Norwegian Digitalization Agency, and she's also a PhD fellow at the University of Oslo, researching how Norway can realize a responsible data-driven government. So again, someone who likes to take small bites with little ambition from this data pie. And Heather has built up and led Norway's open data initiative. So Heather, the floor is first yours to talk about how to measure, what are useful indicators, and what impact are we seeking?
Yeah, thank you very much, Lisa, and thank you very much for having me. I wish I could be there with you all in Estonia. I'm going to put up the slides. I have a slide.
Can we have the slides up on the big screen as well?
There's also feedback, but Okay. So this is, I just want to start really, I suppose, with explaining Norway's data context, because that, I think, frames where I'm coming from and frames where the discussion and our impact measurement, or perhaps lack thereof, is coming from. So we have vast amounts of data. So it's personal data, and this has been done since the 1960s. So we've over 60 years of data built up on tax, health, births, etc., all on the unique personal numbers that you get at birth and immigration. We've hundreds of highly managed, high quality data registered, and of course geodata. Freedom of information and archives is really a pillar in the society of Norway, hugely important for our democracy. So this isn't just decades of data, but hundreds of years of centuries of data. Vast amounts of it which are currently being digitised and are unstructured. Of course, there's huge demand then for unstructured data. Then we have had digital services for many years now. So we have what's commonly known as data exhaust. So this is your behavioural data. So what I'm trying to get across here is that we don't just think open data anymore. I mean, when Lisa introduced me, she said I led open data in Norway until about 2016. Or I led and built up open data, and that's true. But since 2016, we have moved away from open data to think much broader in terms of data and who we share with. We want to share this data, of course, under very strict conditions in some cases, with everybody. So then when we turn then to, do you all still hear me? Am I still there?
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you. So then when we go then to impact measurement, this is where we really start to see how to impact and how difficult it is to measure impact. So in terms of what we call there the red data, so that's your personal data. That's the data that can't be obviously be shared openly. But here we know what is being used for and who is using it. So it's easier to measure the impact there. In terms of amber data, that's the type of data where you might need a login, etc. So this is, we know who is using the data. We may not know exactly what they're using it for, but we know who is using it. And with open data, we go into the unknown. That's where things get really difficult. And that's where Capgem and I are really building up expertise here as well. In terms of how do we measure this impact? How do we, it's very, very difficult because of course it's open licensing. We don't know who is using the data and we don't know what it's being used for. Now, just to finish up here, I want to draw your attention to Rufus Pollock's declaration at CEMIC only 2 weeks ago, where he said that the fight for data availability has been won. Now, that might seem like quite a strange comment, but I agree with it. The job isn't done, and I'm not for 1 second saying it's done, but the fight has been won. I mean, when we first started with open data, it was about trying to measure the impact and find some impact so that we could convince policymakers, we could convince our politicians, we could convince everybody that data was important. But we're not at that stage anymore. We're kind of in a new phase. We're speaking to the converted, and we're at the point of no return, obviously. Like, this is so highly prioritized at national, European and international level. So where impact measurement for us, or finding the impact for us before, was so that we could convince. It's not the case anymore. Now we're into kind of a new phase where we need to see where the impact is, where we need to prioritize, where we need to invest. Because we're at the point of no return here. We're not going back to the days where data isn't important. Now we need to get really real about this, find out where to invest, find out where to prioritize. So that's kind of just a contextualization from me, I suppose, in Norway to give our position on things at the moment.
Thank you so much, Heather, and particularly for highlighting that the fight for availability has been won, but what will we do with that data? What you didn't hear in the Estonian opening statements that probably created most excitement in this room is a now private sector business development type of an ex-civil servant claiming that where government needs to go is mostly culture and medicine and education, and everything else will take care of itself. which
Very
for
good.
me, and hopefully, Michal, you'll answer that, then further highlights the question of what do we measure? What are the useful indicators to measure impact? Is it economic benefit? Is it civic inclusion? Is it, is using data a useful indicator of using data? So with that, I'll open the floor to Michal Kubáň from the Czech Republic, who's currently working as a national open data coordinator at the Ministry of Interior of the Czech Republic, and he's in charge of the open data policy in that government. So Michal, so many questions. What's your first answer?
Yeah, I have prepared small presentations about our Czech story. Thank you. So I would really switch to the next slide already. So please, next slide. Okay, perfect. As you can see from my slide, this is like the European Open Data Maturity Report concerning the measuring of the impact in the Czech Republic, and we are on the 21st place among the EU member states, which is not really good. But well, let's make it clear and simple. We are struggling a bit with the measuring of the impact because I think we are in the end of the phase of opening the data, or the governments, it's already aware that open data must be open. And now we are just a bit struggling with how to measure the open data and how to make it clear. We used to have the methodology which provides the measuring of open data based on the datasets in our national open data portal from different domains, and through the datasets which were already in our open data portal, with the methodology we provide some insight which datasets are used, and we try to contact the open data community. We try to talk with the entrepreneurs about the potential of open data. We said, okay, we have to come into the next phase to make it more complex and constructive in a way that we need to make a project. So next slide, please. Yeah, can I ask you for the next slide? Okay, perfect. And we start the reason why we were so low in measuring the impact of open data in the Czech Republic, that we don't have any really strong policy of measuring the impact. So for that reason, this year we come up with a new project which measure the open data impact with our expert group, which is the groups of 10 experts from different fields of public administration, universities, and the businesses. And we start to think that open data has to be measured through the value of data, because once the data are open, each datasets might have some value, and we need to have some kind of enable or some kind of processor which helps to find the potential of open data itself. So we are not measuring the open data impact in the field of society or economical impact or impact in the environmental. We try to look at the open data as a value which might generate through some open data enable in 3 different views, from views of general society, from the use of how open data can have impact on an open data provider as for instance, public body which provides its open data. But open data itself can help to basically to the data audit of the open data provider. It can help to make government more transparent, and it can have some other advantages and benefits for the open data provider. The third division of our look is to look from the open data enable user, which takes data and try to do something different with the data, for instance, applications, analysis, or something valuable for the society. And we are not measuring the areas of open data impacts through social and economical benefits. We are measuring the open data in these 4 categories, and which we took from the open data impact by GovLab, which basically it's 4 divisions which might have impact on the society. And we have like so far like 38 different metrics which we try to implement, and in 40 indicators that we would like to further develop on our methodology, which is right now being created. So next slide. Yes. So we look not on a particular area of impact, but we look on the value of the data through these like 3 divisions, and we measure these benefits of open data in these 4 categories through the different perspective. For instance, as a savings, we measure how open data can save the potential national budget or the budget of the institutions in order to provide information to public as open data. And we through this we develop for each subdivision, we divide it into 38 metrics, which we will now elaborating on. And we would like to have more like help from or inspiration by the European Data Portal and other colleagues from European Data Barometer to see if we can like improve it, because now is still things which is really challenging for us in the Czech Republic. So that's, I think, the start of my presentation, and now I can put the floor to yours. Thank you.
Thank you. A lot to consider, from what you will measure to dozens of different indicators or metrics, as Michal pointed out. And for that, it feels like it takes a large government to even try to start figuring out that part of the equation, which is why I'm so pleased to open the floor to Mathilde Hoang from France, who's in charge of the open data at ETALab in France. That is the Prime Minister's task force for data policy. And she supports both public actors and the community at large in making their data available for the public, and trying to use ETALab's legal, technical, and organizational expertise to support that. With that, Mathilde, where do we go?
All right. So hello everyone. So first, I would like to thank you for this great opportunity to exchange our different experiences. So as you said, I'm Mathilde Hoang, and I am in charge of open data at ETALab. So my day-to-day job is to support administration in the publishing of their data, get feedback from the users, and of course try to assess the impact of open data. So when we talk about the value of open data, in France, we try to have the broader scope possible, meaning that open data impacts a wide variety of actors, like administrations, researchers, private actors, citizens, of course. So the way we monitor these impacts is really different when it comes to quantifying an economic impact, when we want to quantify an impact for the basic research, or when we want to quantify an impact on the confidence level from citizens. So the tools are not the same, and nor is the accuracy of the monitoring depending on the impact we want to monitor. So I will have the opportunity to discuss it during this panel, but for now, I maybe can quickly present a specific example of how open data had a strong impact for several actors in times of crisis. So as we know, we are going through a global pandemic, and unfortunately, France is strongly affected. You maybe know that, but we have entered a new lockdown today for 1 month. And at ETALab and at the broader scope, since the beginning of the epidemic, we felt that it was essential to mobilize published data related to the pandemic to help the citizens, the administrations, but also local actors to be able to face this pandemic and be able to answer in a good way. So first, it was essential to publish data to provide factual information to citizens about the spread of the epidemic, and therefore to avoid the dissemination of fake news. It was really important to propose data that is in line with the different public policies we have implemented to stop the virus. The publication of the data was also a strong means for decision maker and administration to make an informed decision based on objective facts. So deciders at the central level of the state, but also deciders at the local level, it was really important that everyone had the data and the same data to be able to really make informed decision. And finally, of course, the publication of this data was essential for researchers, for journalists, for companies, for mobile apps, to be able to propose new service for the citizens so that everyone can adapt to the pandemic. So therefore, we have published numerous data about positive cases, data about hospitalization, testing, but also data about the economy and the way the state supports the different companies. And as we know that data can be actually complex to understand, we have developed 2 dashboards that help every citizen to understand the situation and to be able to know what's happening at the local level, but also at the central level. So, as you all know, and I'm sure everyone agree with me, it's really, really difficult to monitor the impact of open data in a quantitative way. And I guess we will talk about it. But on the other side, with this really simple example, which is significant for us, we can easily recognize that opening data in terms of crisis has brought significant positive impact for numerous actors.
Thank you. And we've traveled in about 15 minutes from research to policy to the pandemic, which of course cannot be ignored in 2020. And now it's time to take a quick trip to evaluation. So Esther and Laura from Capgemini, who work with the European data portal, will speak exactly about that. What is the approach for measuring socioeconomic impact recommended by evaluation experts? And with the European data portal, Esther is a digital transformation consultant at Capgemini Invent and the project manager for the European Commission Support Center for Data Sharing. Before that, she was very involved also with the European data portal, focusing on the impact of open data and its promotion. And her colleague Laura is a digital transformation consultant at Capgemini Invent, leading the consortium of partners that run the European Commission's data portal since 2015. So she's supported both the member states and European data portal, therefore the Commission in doing so, ranging from economic impact to supporting governments. The floor is yours, ladies.
Thank you, Lisa, for this introduction. Laura, would you like to start introducing yourself from your side?
Yes. Thanks, Lisa, for the introduction. Indeed, very happy to be here and to be talking about the impact of open data. And so thanks for the introduction. Indeed, I've been part of the European data portal for some time, where we really focus on making data more easily findable and discoverable, and supporting data publishers in opening up their data. Thanks for unmuting, that's a lot better. And the European data portal is basically the main access point for open data published in Europe. So what our colleagues from France, Norway and Czech Republic talked about, that data that is published on these national portals are combined in the European. And besides the portal itself, we focus a lot of our efforts on doing research on topics like the impact of open data. And Esther and I together worked on the report called The Economic Impact of Open Data, which was published earlier this year. And to start answering the question a bit, yes, impact measuring is difficult. And yes, it is associated with a lot of assumptions, but it's not impossible. It can be done, though there may be some caveats. And in our experience, a hybrid of, let's say, a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach has proven to be quite beneficial. So for the top-down approach, I would like to hand over to Esther to tell us a little bit more about that, and then afterwards I will tell you a bit about the bottom-up.
Great, thanks, Laura. And thanks, Lisa, for the introduction and for having us. We've spent so much time on thinking about the economic impact or the socioeconomic impact of open data, so it's always great to learn more. So I'm really curious about today. I've been working on the European Data Portal. I've been part of this journey that's been going on for almost 6 years now. And we've been developing it further also into the data sharing space, looking at open data and shared data together. That's also what we emphasized in the report, looking at the economic impact of open data. Challenges when doing the impossible, Heather, you said already, open data per se is per definition not known. It's not known who reuses it and for what. So that makes, of course, the evaluation of the impact created harder. We see great examples, for example, from France, from ATLab, where you can voluntarily share the stories of impact creation, but how can we tell the economic, the financial side of the bigger story of open data? And why financial? Why all those numbers? Why the economic impact? That's partially because many stakeholders that have a decision power in the strategy of open data have to think that way. They have to think in economic terms. And that's why we are focusing on the economic side of the many stories of open data impact. And I try to do that from a macro perspective, what we call the top-down approach, looking at the market size of open data, the employability, and the different potential in the sectors. And there we looked at the literature from the last 20, 30 years when open data was not called open data yet. So terminology is another challenge we can talk about. We try to express the open data market size as part of GDP, and then looking at different growth scenarios inspired by growth factors from data, from digitization, so not just looking at open data, looking at the potential the open data market size has, looking at different sectors and also what that means for employability. And to make this theoretical concept a little bit more tangible, we also looked at the bottom-up approach, and that was done mainly by Laura.
Okay, thanks. Yes, so indeed, as Esther said, complements this more macro approach. We looked at things from more bottom-up, so really example-based, looking at real open data reuse cases, and the economic but also non-economic outcomes, such as social impact. We looked at, for example, applications that can help save lives. We looked at environmental benefits, time saved, etc. And we tried to extrapolate these, let's say, more regional or sometimes national examples to a national or even European scope. To really look at, okay, what could the potential effects, potential impact, if this example that is, let's say, active in Paris in France, if it would be applied to the whole of Europe, what impact could that potentially create? So by doing this, combined with the top-down approach, and also with an extra check with a survey and input from organizations working with open data, we hope to have established a relative complete view of the impact of open data. Now back to you, Lisa.
And before I let you ladies go, let me ask you a quick follow-up question, since you have this unique cross-border pan-European view. Do you think the way we approach measuring impact of open data or shared data is culture-specific or it's universal? Now, why is what's being shared here applicable to the Estonian citizens and data processors, frankly?
Well, good question. I think that question was for us, right? So I tried to give it a start. I don't see so many cultural differences. I see progressively a change in the understanding of open data impact and its measurement, and that I feel many cultures or countries or regions go through these steps. So we started with looking at the number of data sets available, which is frankly not really a good indicator for demand, nor impact, nor maturity. And then we looked at number of downloads. That's interesting because we see which data sets were actually downloaded. So someone seemed to have an interest or clicked accidentally. And then we understood that the number of downloads maybe says a little bit about the demand, but doesn't say much about the impact, because we still don't know what happened with this data set that was downloaded and was impact created or not. So we try to understand the demand by actually talking to the reusers. And we try to measure the impact by looking at the impact creation of those apps and services and processes that are based on open data. So when we talk about the impact of open data, we actually talk about the impact of services based on open data, and often also on shared data, and other factors influence that impact created. If an app has great marketing, well, then the impact is maybe higher, not just due to open data, but also due to other factors. And we take that into account and understand the limitations of that, but enjoy a more holistic view of impact creation through open data. And I would say these are the steps many countries and regions went through, regardless of culture. There are differences, I would say, in culture, to which degree the view on open data is more centralized or more regional and local, and to which degree open and shared data should be looked at holistically. Well, there I still see differences right now, where I'm curious where it's going in which direction first. Laura, maybe something to add from your side?
Before the Open Knowledge Estonia team checks for the audience questions on the Menti platform, that I'd like to remind the audience, both here in Tallinn and online, anywhere in the world and anywhere in Estonia, to post their questions on. Let me do a lightning round with the other three panelists. We've had a look at a number of different ways to approach assessing impact, measuring impact, hopefully quantifying it. But in one sentence or less, bring us back to the beginning and tell us, in your mind, what's the number one reason or benefit for citizens, users, and processors of open and shared data do you even try to quantify? One sentence or less. Why don't we start with Michal?
It's basically to give citizens to data to information. We need to have information to know what will happen and what had happened in the near future, and to be aware about the data which are around us. That's the reason why we need the open data to be open and to be provided to citizens and to data experts, especially in the time of COVID. So.
Heather, do you hear us? One sentence or less of why are we paying attention to this panel?
Because I think the value for data sharing for us, it's about building your data-driven government. It's about improving your services for citizens, about being more efficient, more effective. It's about building your data-driven economy so that we build better companies, that we build companies that are based on data. And of course, it's about openness and transparency. It's about that value of the citizen, as Michal was saying, about the citizen actually getting that data. And what we need to always remember there is that we also need to be doing the human readable data, not just the machine readable data.
Mathilde.
Well, I would say three main reasons. First, it saves a lot of time for the administration that publish the data on a unique point of access, but it also helps the administration to better use the data and propose data-driven policies. Of course, it enables companies to develop new services thanks to this data that is critical and essential. And of course, it brings more transparency to the action of the administration, and then it strengthens the confidence in our institutions.
And it looks like we indeed have audience questions, so Silla will try to consolidate to ask them from you.
Yeah. Do you hear me? Yes. So thank you also for everybody who are giving thumbs up for the questions. So it's helped to me to pick the questions as well. So Laura and Esther were talking about the bottom-up and top-down approach. Where and how should they meet?
Very good question, very interesting.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's a matter of having the two of them meet, it's just the two of them complementing each other, if that makes sense. So
I think in an ideal scenario, oh, sorry, Laura. You go on.
No, go ahead.
In an ideal scenario, we would have the market size of open data, and then all apps together would end up at the same amount. And for the statisticians here, that would make it feel very good. It just doesn't work that way. So there are two different goals in the top-down and the bottom-up approach. It's not to make the bottom line of both numbers meet. It's about telling different stories. And one is showing the potential, yeah?
To quickly
And the
follow
other
up
one
on
the
that,
story.
but then if so to say, the different parties are singing from a different hymn sheet, if not reading from completely different pages, how do we make sure that they're working towards the same aim? You know, how do we make sure that the maximum benefit isn't lost in two very separate approaches?
Well, the first approach makes clear what the potential is. The second approach shows examples of how it is used and maximized. I'd say that's the angle. So there are always examples that cannot be shown in one report. So there's more impact created that we could show. But let's say there's so much potential that we shown that there's a lot of impact to generate a potential to use first.
Silla?
Mm-hmm. So there's questions popping up. Should there be more effort in grassroots cooperation in integrating cross-border data, like in Estonia and Latvia together, for example?
And I'd love to hear also from the national perspectives, are you missing cross-border data? Would it be more useful for Heather to have a Swedish data set that's like enough that it's useful for you?
Yeah, I mean, the cross-border, I think, is somewhere where we're not getting enough attention to now. I mean, if we think from a private sector perspective, we have a very small market, we have 5 million people, okay? So we need to scale. Our companies, yes, they can get great Norwegian data, but they need to scale across the border. So we need to do a lot more interoperability throughout Europe as well in order to get this data shared. And there is a lot of work going on, but I like that idea as well of this grassroots. We need to also hear more from the grassroots about what is needed there and what type of data we need to be working on. But absolutely, it's hugely important.
Does anyone like to add something from the panelists on cross-border open shared data cooperation? Michal.
Yes, I definitely agree that we need more cross-national open data, and we also need the cooperation with the grassroots organization to help us to look for the impact of open data and to tell us what is good for them to make society more open data driven. The Czech Republic is small, and we know about few small communities in the area of environment and the people who are interested in business and company register to make the business out of it, which is really good, which is one of the impact of open data. Data from public and business register are used to generate some incomes and some potential economic. But I think what is really challenging now is that to ensure the interoperability through the EU members, because some of the data can be easily transferable and transformed from one country to another country. And I think this is also the big potential for the high-value data sets, which is the new Implementation Act, which is the part of the new Open Data Directive. And as a Czech Republic, we are aware that it's not on the list of the data sets which will be selected on the 6 categories will be beneficial for digital society and digital economic, but also we have to discuss with the member states some technical specification, how we ensure the interoperability to the EU member states. And for that reason, we just write our position paper that each dataset needs to have some technical specification in which will be used and discussed with other member states in order to achieve the interoperability. And basically, it will ensure the usage of these datasets through the entire Europe.
Mathilde, you were out of every single panelist probably nodding the most in the last minute or two. Would you like to add something, and in particular on what this interoperability looks like? Because otherwise it's one of those European buzzwords that we all declare, but is close to meaningless unless it's furnished with action.
Yeah, this is really a really good point, Michael, because we have this problem at the national level. For example, in France, we have data sets from local actors, and when we want to aggregate the same data set at the national level, we realized that the name of the columns and the way we enter the data was not the same, and we cannot aggregate it. It's like, okay, this is fine, we have a lot of data sets, but I can actually don't do anything with the data set, so this is so bad, and that's why I think at the national level we have to make effort to have the most aggregated and interoperable data sets, and maybe we should discuss it with other countries, maybe to try to have this data schemes for the most iconic data sets, for example, data address, register companies, stuff like that. We know that in France we are not good enough to go pick the data sets from this country and broadcast it in our portal. Otherwise, we have made a lot of efforts to get inspired by different countries on the way we publish data sets. For example, at the beginning of the pandemic, we tried to look to all the data set that has been published by different actors from, Singapore, Italy, Germany, and we have looked at all the data schemes, and we have tried to propose the same scheme so that everyone can we use the data set and cross it with other data sets from other countries. And I think the pandemic issue is a really good example, because we are facing a global pandemic and we need figures from all the countries, and we need to be able to cross these figures. And this is really important to talk to each other and be able to present data sets in the same schemes.
Thank you so much. And now we come to a point of a conference where there's a lot of audience questions, a lot to say, but also the most sacred rule of panels: you never cut into people's coffee. So with the last around 3 minutes remaining, I would like all of you to close briefly with what's next? What's the way forward, whether based on the global pandemic experience or on a bigger macro level? Where should you start with quantifying impact and measuring impact, whether it's a method, a sector, or an area of data, or whether it's legislation or something else. Where do you start to see the most impact of measuring impact of open and shared data? And let's this time around start with Capgemini, so Laura and Esther first.
Okay, well, I would say there's several points that can be made as to what would be the way forward. I think one of the very important ones is to look at the opportunity to create a European-wide framework for measuring impact, because this has been proven to be so difficult for different countries to start developing themselves, and it's not the most efficient way to have each and every country reinvent the wheel in terms of this open data impact assessment. So this is definitely something that we would really like to push forward and create a European framework for measuring the impact to help the different European countries in starting to measure impact, and also have a common ground so you can compare the different types of impact across Europe.
And a European framework for one. Esther, what's your number 2? We'll get 5 quick lessons in the remaining 1 minute. Esther, European framework,
All right.
what's number 2?
Learning from mistakes that GDP and open data market size doesn't go together. Open data employment. We need to rethink this concept. We need to look at skills. I'm curious what ethics will do after the pandemic to look at data more holistically, how we can share data, and I'm happy that more sectors are data-driven, giving us more numbers to have more stable calculations next time.
Mathilde.
Well, from over the past year, we realized that we actually cannot track every reuse from every data set. So we want now to be able to track the most impactful data set that has been published in a quantitative way, meaning that we want to see the downloads, but also what reuses have been done with the data. But we also want to propose a more qualitative process where we animate the community and we try to exchange with the producers and the reusers to understand, well, what has been done with the data and what can we do more and more effectively in the future.
Michal, your one fundamental place where to start, to get most success, and then Heather to finish this up.
So we are still in the process of creating the methodology how to measure the impact of open data in the Czech Republic. But I believe what can really help to somehow establish that we have the concept of the master user. It's basically the user using particular data sets for its own purposes in different categories. The user itself can provide the feedback on the technical quality and also can comment on the life cycles of the data sets and can basically subscribe to our national portal, that we know that he is on our side to providing the feedback to the public institutions. And this concept might help to specify the main domains and to establish the key stakeholders in particular domains, which will help us to measure and define the impact of open data.
And Heather, last but by no means least.
Yeah, I think we need to be looking broader in terms of shared data, so not just open data and the impact there. I think we need to be looking at the investment and what the real investment is here and how we can prioritise. And at the risk of not coming with something new, I want to support Laura's suggestion of a European framework for this, because we're all reinventing the wheel, we're all trying to find the answer, whereas we need to find, and this goes back to interoperability in a sense as well. We need to find this European way, and I hope that there'll be big consultation with the member states and with the states on that as well.
Yeah, sorry if I take still a last bit of time. I think this is key. I think collaborating between the different countries, between the different national data portals is absolute key in making this work and having the way forward be a bright one. And I think that the events like this one, a certain open data forum, discussing together with all of you is one of the ways in which we can make that happen. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and what a lovely sentiment to finish on. There's no openness and no sharing without collaboration. So I'd like everyone to join me in an applause to thank the panelists from across the Europe, as well as the technical team that made this possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa.
Ciao.
Thank you very much.
Suur tänu. Minul tekkis küll tunne, et kus on see kõnetuvastus pluss tõlkeäpp, mida mul just praegu nagu vaja oleks. Et loodetavasti keegi juba kuskil töötab seda välja, et selle seedimine, selle väärtusliku info seedimine läheks hõlpsamalt meie kõigi jaoks. Meil tuleb nüüd kohvipaus. Julgustan teid tutvuma ka veel nende erinevate rakendustega, mis ekraanide peal jooksevad. Enne kui te ära jooksete, menti.com ja koodid on üleval seinte peal ja kes ei ole veel jõudnud, palun vastake siis sellele küsimusele, mis võimalik, et annab ka vihje näiteks Majandus-Kommunikatsiooniministeeriumile tõugata ja nügida seda mõju mõõtmist edasi, sest siin on niivõrd mitmeid erinevaid võimalusi, mida seada prioriteediks, nagu te kuulsite, mis valikud on sotsiaalsest, majanduslikust, kultuurilisest, ühiskondlikust, kodanikele avalduvast mõjust, ettevõtetele loodavast väärtusest, et siin tuleb teadlikult panna fookusi. Ja mul on väga hea meel, et meie kogu foorum on sellele teemale pühendatud ja peale lõunat ka üks konkreetne töötuba siis nendest meetoditest räägib. Nii et tundub, et te olete nõus viimase küsimusega, et tehtagu, hakatagu mõõtma majanduslikku mõju ja järelikult tuleb ka välja nuputada, kuidas just täpselt. Et mis asi see siis on, milles see avaldub ja mismoodi saada teada, et number tuleb 42 ja siis veel hakata võrdlema kõigi teiste ülejäänud riikidega ka. Aga on keeruline ja loomulikult potentsiaal siis mida see annab, et mitte kohaindeksis, mis on kõrvalsaadus, vaid aru saama, et kuhu rohkem panustada, et kuidas seda väärtust rohkem luua. Nii, aga suur tänu Liisale, sa olid väga vapper seal ees seistes kogu selle valgus joa enda peale võtmisega ja oli hea meel, et tehniliselt töötas väga hästi. Ja nüüd, et püsida Zoomi vaatajatega samas ajatsoonis, kellaajas ja graafikus, meie siin läheme, võtame väikse võiku, te võite teha oma köögis täpselt seda sama asja ja tuleme palun tagasi täpselt 11.50. Sest siis me alustame punkti pealt Ott Velsbergi ettekandega. Suur tänu!